Everybody, my name is Jeff Lerner. I'm with the EPA. I'm currently working with our Chesapeake Bay program, but I'm also connected to our Office of Wetlands, Oceans, and Watersheds, which has an acronym OWOW, which we love. And I have Richard Mitchell with me as well. And we thought we would, if it's okay, share this presentation and just try to divide up the time a little bit. We've got these 8 minutes and we've got about 8 or so slides. And we thought we could run through that with you. And as was indicated, we're just going to kind of touch on the surface of all of this, but we'd be happy to have some further conversations down the line as well, if any of this piques your interest.
And Jeff, do you want me to share?
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead.
Let me go ahead and
that too.
Yeah.
Okay. I put this in presenter mode. It does not seem to be well. I think we can just go this route. If everyone can see the slides, it doesn't seem to want to go into. Oh, there we go. How's that? Everyone sees the title page? Give a thumbs up if you can see it.
Yeah. Good, Richard.
All right, great. So as Jeff said, I'll start by just kind of giving a very high level overview of some of the programs at EPA that do fund aquatic resource connectivity, aquatic restoration, and so forth. And then Jeff will talk more specifically about some of the efforts within the Chesapeake Bay program. So as many of you know, EPA's main purpose is to implement the Clean Water Act, and everyone thinks, well, that's mainly focused on water quality. But that also includes supporting the living resources within the water. So a lot of the activities EPA does do impact living aquatic resources. The key activities in which we are funding efforts such as stream restoration, aquatic connectivity, and so forth, deal with grants specifically that go directly to states and other partnership programs, which the Chesapeake Bay program is one of those programs. EPA also provides a large number of technical assistance tools and activities to both states and other partners on the ground. And EPA also, in many cases, works as a forum or a coordinator at the watershed level to bring different partners together to meet the needs of aquatic restoration and aquatic conservation at the watershed scale. Just to give you an overview of some of these programs, we have what are called place-based programs, which the Chesapeake Bay program is one of them. These are called the geographic programs. So we have 12 nationally. There's one in the Great Lakes, Puget Sound, San Francisco Bay, the Gulf of Mexico, which in reality actually includes the entire basin of the Mississippi River and all of its tributaries. EPA also supports states directly through non-point source grant programs. So the Clean Water Act 319 program that does a lot of non-point source restoration activities, pollution control activities, watershed protection plans, and so forth. And then another one that a lot of people don't think about, but actually has in the more recent years been doing more and more aquatic connectivity and aquatic conservation efforts, is the state revolving funds. So this is the Clean Water Act state revolving and the drinking water state revolving funds. Won't get too much detail about that, but that is another opportunity for funding. EPA also, as I mentioned, has developed a number of tools and has a big source of monitoring data through the National Aquatic Resource Surveys, but also the Healthy Watershed and Assessment tools, as well as a Recovery Potential Screening tool, which has been very valuable for a lot of watershed programs when they're interested in investing funds for restoration efforts and determining where they'll get the most bang for the buck, so to speak. As I mentioned, there's a number of funding programs at EPA, but EPA did not receive under the BIL program or the funding effort anything specifically for fish passage or fish conservation. But as I mentioned, there's a number of programs that do have flexibility to support fish passage and fish aquatic conservation efforts. But under the BIL fund, even though it wasn't specifically earmarked for these kind of activities, there is that flexibility. And so the National Estuary Program, so there's 28 of these around the country, including the Delaware estuary and a number of other ones in the Northeast. They received an additional 132 million from the BIL funds. The geographic programs, so like the Chesapeake Bay program, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative program, received $1.7 billion in addition to its normal annual funds. And then the state revolving funds received $48 billion in addition to their normal annual funding levels. As I mentioned, the 319 program, that's a grant program that goes straight to the states, and then the states are the ones that put out the grants. So that would be a situation where, you know, this program, this fish habitat partnership might reach out to Pennsylvania or West Virginia or Virginia with their 319 programs and try to obtain money. While they didn't receive BIL funds, they do currently get approximately 200 million a year in funding put out by Congress. And page down seems to be stuck. My apologies, I won't advance. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. And so just to give you an idea of the number of, like, say, dam removal, fish passage activity that's gone on underneath the 319 program, there's been 47 dam removal projects that have been either completely or partially funded by the 319 grant program for a total of $19 million over that time period. For the NEPs, there's been 365 fish passage projects since 2006 funded by the NEP partnerships for a total of 885 million. And then without getting into specifics for the GEO programs, but I'll talk about the Great Lakes Initiative. Since 2010, they've funded projects that have opened up more than 6,000 additional stream miles to fish conservation and fish passage. Pretty much EPA works as a partner with a number of different federal and state and NGO collaborators. And it's because of those partnerships that we are able to get more done with individual efforts not being able to meet that goal. But as a collaborative effort, we're able to get a lot more done based on those partnerships. Just real quickly, I'll give you a very large overview of the NEPs. So as I mentioned, there's 28 NEPs around the country. The one thing I want to point out, while the NEPs here are focusing on the estuary and the near estuary areas, those watersheds, and so for example, down for 20, which is the around Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico, they will fund projects throughout the entire Mississippi basin potentially, but it has to have a clean water or a water quality aspect to it. And that aspect has to be focused in on improving the estuary conditions. So activities in the watershed obviously impact the estuaries. So if you can make those connections to the estuary condition, you can fund projects up in the watersheds as well. And some of those watersheds are much larger than what's being depicted on this map. At this point, I'll turn it over to Jeff, and Jeff, just let me know when you want to advance.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Richard. I'll try to speed up a little bit in the interest of time. So I know we're here to talk about eastern brook trout, and I know the distribution of the brook trout doesn't cover the entire country here, but this is just kind of pivots off of what Richard was talking about. We do have the National Estuary Program, which has those 28 different locations. These are those 12 geographic programs that Richard mentioned. And as you can see, the Gulf of Mexico is a very large geography. The one I think that has a nice overlap with brook trout, of course, is the Chesapeake Bay program. And so I thought I'd just zero in on that a little bit. If you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a picture of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. and includes the distribution of brook trout in it, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. The map on the right, however, is a map showing some of the different underserved communities that we've identified throughout the watershed. And the reason why that's significant is because our bipartisan infrastructure law funds that we receive, that extra $200 million of funding that Richard mentioned that went to the Chesapeake Bay, that's also connected to what they call Justice 40. And so we are expected to expend at least 40% of those funds to focus on some of these different underserved communities and meeting their needs. So this is just a way of kind of illustrating, we can look at the overlap between where people are and their needs, and also brook trout potentially. I know that Lori has been involved in some of our conversations with our Healthy Watersheds goal team associated with the Chesapeake Bay as well. And I think we're very interested in finding alignment between the healthiest watersheds within the Chesapeake Bay, the larger watershed, the sub-watersheds that are healthy, and looking at where brook trout refugia are as well. And I do know that in the past, EPA has supported efforts along the lines of healthy watersheds conservation, and we're interested in continuing to do that going forward. And one project that I'll highlight from some of that past investment was actually supporting some fish survey work that was done in Pennsylvania. That was a grant to Trout Unlimited, who did some fish survey work to identify different areas that were important, outstanding waters for trout, and ultimately work through the designation process to get some additional protections attributed to some of those different stream reaches, and has resulted in several hundred miles of additional stream protection within Pennsylvania. So that's the kind of thing that some of our funds may be able to help support going forward. And we certainly work on the issue of fish passage, and we certainly have brook trout right now as one of our outcomes within the Chesapeake Bay program. I think the next slide.
Yeah. Sorry.
So Chesapeake Bay has been working on fish for a while. Not all of the programs are as engaged, but as Richard said, some of the national estuary programs are getting more interested in this. He mentioned the Great Lakes example here, where they've just since 2010 been working on aquatic connectivity. And just to echo some of the comments Richard made on the state revolving funds, the state revolving funds may be very unique to many of you. In many cases, these are actually loans rather than grants, and that may be kind of off-putting for some of you. But there are ways to tap into the SRF funds where they can function like grants. State of Ohio, for example, has done some really innovative work and provides approximately $15 million a year to ecosystem restoration type projects. They've done dam removals, they've done wetland restoration and recovery programs, and some of the other states are starting to move in that direction. Historically, only about 4% of the money that the SRFs award each year through loans and grants has gone to non-point source projects. But we think that that's beginning to change. And the best way to bring that about is to develop relationships with the SRFs and have conversations about water quality needs and how protecting land and restoring land for water quality, as well as aquatic connectivity and fish and so forth, all go together. So that's a recommendation we would make, and maybe that's something we can help you with. I think I'm going to go to just the next slide, and I think we're almost done here. Yeah, so this is just kind of a wrap-up slide. EPA does a lot of things that are in the realm of water and water quality. We're not specifically focused on fish, but there are overlaps. And ultimately, if we implement the Clean Water Act, we are ultimately moving waters in the direction of becoming fishable and swimmable. And so that means there is overlap with what you do. And we certainly value partnerships with a variety of different entities, agencies, and nonprofit organizations, et cetera, that are working in watersheds. So we have a series of watershed related activities. We also do a fair amount of research. This is something Richard's pretty involved in, and also survey work. And this list talks about our water quality standards and aquatic life criteria, fish consumption advisories, which we work with the sometimes the states and local communities on, and just a whole series of other R&D activities as well that you may or may not be as familiar with. So maybe the big takeaway here is think about the connection between water quality and the work that you're doing on eastern brook trout, and think about the agencies, both EPA and the state agencies that work on water quality, and that includes drinking water, as potential allies in what it is that you're doing. So Richard, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I think in the interest of time, we should probably end it there. I think that was good. Thanks.
All right. I think that's it for us then. Thanks for giving us a few extra minutes there.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey and Richard. And in the interest of time, I think I did give you an impossible task, potentially. So if we bleed over a little bit into the next session, then that's what happens. We're not going to cut off Amanda at the end or anything. So we'll give everybody time, and that was some interesting ways, and hopefully maybe you've gleaned some new ways of thinking about 319 funds or state revolving funds that can help Brook trout. Next, we have Melanie Gange from NOAA. And Melanie, are you here? And did I pronounce your name right? Is it?
Yep.
Okay. I'm just gonna let you go ahead with your presentation and see ways that NOAA connects with Brook trout and national funding as well for fish projects.
All right, it looks like my screen is shared. Okay. All right, thanks everybody. I'm pleased to be here presenting to you all. Just wanted to cover briefly that NOAA Fisheries and our Office of Habitat Conservation does have 30 years of successful collaboration on habitat conservation, which is what led up to us, our participation in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act grant programs. Not only am I trying to talk to you about one program in just a couple minutes, I'm actually trying to talk to you about 4. The funding shown on the slide here was made available to us in 2022. Some of it has been allocated to our first round of funding. The projects for our first round have been selected, and I'll have some details for you on the next slide. With the addition of the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, funding resources, our second round is expected to have more funding available to it than our first round. We also do anticipate that there will be at least one more round of competitions, but those competitions will use our BIL funds. All right, so the reason that this map is important for this presentation is that it's giving you a really strong sense of where our programs work and where they're going to have the greatest nexus to brook trout. So while there are 4 different programs, they are all coastal in nature. And so our most common nexus to brook trout are going to be for sea run or coastal brook trout, but also in Great Lakes watersheds. The other thing to keep in mind is that there might be cold water habitat where brook trout are cohabitating with other target species for our funds. And so I'll address that specific to each of the competitions coming up. Nothing new on this slide. All right, here we go. So this is the first of the 4 competitions I wanted to talk about. This competition is closed for this year, but in future years, what the focus would be projects where brook trout are sea-run migratory fish, or they are Great Lakes native species, or as I just mentioned, they're living in streams that have sea-run migratory fish or Great Lakes native species, and you would target the proposal towards the benefits to those fish, knowing that brook trout would also benefit. But these are specifically for fish passage and barrier removal. This opportunity closes in about 8 days. Similarly to what I just said, you're going to be interested here in looking for those sea-run migratory fish or the Great Lakes native species, because those are the target species for these competitions, but also a federally recognized tribe has to be the applicant for this competition. All right, so this is the first of the competitions that I'm talking about that is not focused on fish passage. This is looking at all forms of habitat restoration projects that restore marine, estuarine, coastal, or Great Lakes ecosystems. The applicants should be proposing work in coastal, marine, or estuarine areas that benefit species of fish that are outlined in our program priorities in the opportunity. So this is pretty tightly tied to NOAA Fisheries mission. First category of species here are those that are threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act and managed by NOAA Fisheries, not those managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. Second category are the commercial fishery stocks managed by NOAA under the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act. Next category is saltwater recreational fisheries. And the last category are native fish species to the Great Lakes. So again, some of your closest nexus for brook trout are going to be the Great Lakes native species, which brook trout is. But there, again, might also be places where brook trout are present in coastal habitats, and a connection can be made to how they are, they or the other species living there can benefit ESA listed species or fish stocks managed under Magnuson-Stevens. The final competition that we have this year is focused on benefits for tribes and underserved communities. It should implement habitat restoration or capacity building in coastal areas, in addition to providing that support for tribes, tribal entities, or underserved communities to meaningfully engage those folks in coastal habitat restoration. So when you dive deeper into the funding opportunity, you're going to find that it is specifically describing coastal areas as coastal shoreline counties or coastal watershed counties, which the coastal shoreline counties are actually directly adjacent to the open ocean, estuaries, or Great Lakes. The coastal watershed counties are located inland, but with a significant impact on coastal and ocean resources. So for this competition, you would want to show that brook trout are within either that coastal shoreline or coastal watershed county, but you don't need to make the connection to those NOAA managed species that I mentioned for the prior competition. Instead, your connection really should be to tribes and underserved communities and whether or not the restoration is going to benefit them as well. The other thing that this slide is highlighting is that of the 45 million in funding available under this competition, 20 million of that is going to be held specifically for US federally recognized tribes, Alaska Native corporations, and organizations that represent those tribes through formal agreements. They can also be a subrecipient and still be able to receive the 20 million that's being set aside. And then there is still 25 million available to all eligible applicants. I do have another slide about this competition here just to highlight the kinds of work that you might choose to apply for funding for here. And so again, we're looking to help build capacity for tribes and underserved communities. We're looking to support their science needs that might help them make decisions about future coastal restoration. And then also restoration projects as well. And again, the application deadline for this one isn't until December 19th, so you have a little bit more time for this one. And across all of these, there is an emphasis on meaningfully engaging tribes and underserved communities. And so, just wanted to let you know that when you look into these funding opportunities, you will see that definition of meaningful engagement, so that we can really make sure that the benefits of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding are flowing back to tribes and underserved communities. There were a series of email addresses across the slide, and I'll make sure Lori already has a copy so that she can share it with you so that you have all those email addresses. But you can also look on this website here, the fisheries.noaa.gov/habitat-BIL-IRA, and be connected to all 4 of these competitions. For the 3 competitions that are still open, the webinars have been recorded so that you can get access to those as well. And that is it for me today.